Most American cities become enormous for a reason you can see immediately. New York had a harbor. Chicago had the Great Lakes and the railroads. Los Angeles had the Pacific, the climate, and room to expand. Houston had a ship channel, oil, and the Gulf Coast. Oklahoma City had almost none of that. It sits in the middle of the country, far from an ocean, far from a major navigable river, and surrounded by the flat, open land of central Oklahoma. It does not have the natural geography that usually creates a great American city. And yet, when you look at a modern map, Oklahoma City is enormous. The municipal boundary stretches across more than 600 square miles. It contains downtown towers, state government, old neighborhoods, stockyards, industrial land, airports, highways, parks, oil fields, and huge amounts of open space. It is so large that the map and the city you experience on the ground can feel like two completely different places. Drive through downtown and Oklahoma City can feel compact. Bricktown feels walkable. The skyline feels contained. The capital rises above the north side. There are sports arenas, museums, old warehouses, restaurants, and blocks that look like a normal Midwestern downtown. Then you drive for 20 minutes. The city keeps going. The buildings thin out, the streets widen, the lots get bigger. Open land appears between neighborhoods. Highway interchanges replace storefronts. A city that seemed like a modest state capital suddenly feels as if it has no edge at all. That is the Oklahoma City paradox. How did a city that began as a tiny frontier town become physically larger than many far more famous American cities? How did a place founded almost overnight, in the middle of a land rush, become a sprawling capital of oil, cattle, aviation, highways, and civic ambition? The answer is that Oklahoma City was built around one idea from the beginning. Land was not the obstacle. Land was the prize. Every city has a founding story. Oklahoma City has a starting gun. On April 22, 1889, the federal government opened a vast area of central Oklahoma to settlement. The land had been known as the unassigned lands. At noon, thousands of people rushed into the territory to claim lots, farms, and futures. Some arrived on horseback, some came in wagons, some came by train. Some had waited at the boundary for weeks. Others tried to get in early, earning the nickname Sooners. The moment the land opened, the race began. Within hours, what had been open prairie became a new settlement. Approximately 5,000 people claimed space in an original town site of only 400 acres. There was no slow colonial growth, no small village gradually becoming a town over generations, no harbor that quietly attracted merchants for 100 years. Oklahoma City appeared in a single day. And even its first map was a fight. Two town site companies claimed different ideas of where the streets and lots should go. Both wanted to shape the future of a place that barely existed. Residents had to form a committee to reconcile the competing maps and create a usable city plan. That tells you almost everything about Oklahoma City. Before it had permanent buildings, it had competing visions of territory. Before it had a mature economy, it had arguments over blocks, streets, and claims. Before it had a civic identity, it had a map. The city was incorporated the following year, but the real question was never whether Oklahoma City would survive. The question was whether this strange settlement in the middle of the plains could become important enough to stay. At first, there was one obvious advantage. The railroad had arrived before the city did. A rail line had already crossed the area, with a stop near the North Canadian River. That station became a foothold for the new settlement. In a landscape where distance could be brutal and roads could disappear into mud or dust, rail access meant connection. It linked a frontier town to Kansas, Texas, the Midwest, and markets far beyond Oklahoma territory. The city could ship crops. It could receive building materials. It could bring in workers, merchants, machinery, and money. A place that had been empty prairie could suddenly act like a commercial center. Then came cattle. Central Oklahoma sat in the middle of a region shaped by ranching, farming, and the movement of livestock. Oklahoma City did not have a deep water port, but it had something that mattered just as much on the plains. It had a crossroads. In the early 20th century, city leaders helped bring meatpacking operations near the Oklahoma National Stockyards. The stockyards turned Oklahoma City into a place where cattle did not simply pass through. They could be bought, sold, processed, shipped, and turned into an industrial economy. The city began to make sense as a place of trade, but it still did not make sense as a major city. It was a railroad crossroads and a cattle market. Plenty of places had those. It was growing, but growth alone did not explain why Oklahoma City would become the dominant city in the state. Then, it won the prize that every ambitious frontier city wanted. It became the capital. When Oklahoma became a state, the territorial capital was in Guthrie, north of Oklahoma City. Guthrie had been established earlier. It had government buildings. It had political influence. It had every reason to believe it would remain the center of the new state. But Oklahoma City had energy, population, business interests, and a growing belief that the state's future should be built around it. In 1910, Oklahoma voters chose Oklahoma City as the state capital. The state seal was moved from Guthrie to Oklahoma City, and suddenly the city was no longer just a land-run settlement with rail access and stockyards. It was the place where state power would be concentrated. The capital gave the city something more valuable than a single industry. It gave it permanence. Governments do not disappear when a crop fails. Public institutions do not pack up when a railroad changes its route. State workers, courts, lawmakers, universities, contractors, and services create a long-term foundation for a city. Oklahoma City had turned itself from an improvised frontier grid into the political center of a brand new state. But the most absurd chapter of the story was still underground. In 1928, oil was discovered inside the city limits. For most cities, the skyline is the symbol of wealth. In Oklahoma City, wealth was literally underneath the skyline. Wells appeared within the city. Oil companies arrived. Investors arrived. Jobs arrived. The energy industry transformed the economy and tied Oklahoma City to the national demand for petroleum. There is something almost ridiculous about the image. A state capital sitting above an oil field. A city that had started with tents and disputed lots now had derricks, pipelines, refineries, offices, and a growing financial economy. The city was not merely on the path of American expansion anymore. It was helping fuel it. This is when Oklahoma City began to develop its most unusual talent. Whenever the city found a new reason to grow, it did not just add jobs, it added territory. That distinction matters. Most people think of a city as the dense part, the downtown, the neighborhoods, the places with sidewalks and blocks and traffic lights. But a city is also a legal boundary. It is a line on a map that decides what government provides services, where taxes are collected, who maintains roads, and which future development becomes part of the city. Oklahoma City understood the power of that line. As the 20th century moved forward, the city continued to spread outward. Its boundary expanded across the prairie around it. By 1965, Oklahoma City included more than 600 square miles. Think about how strange that is. The city began as 400 acres. It began as a compact town site created in a land rush. Less than a century later, it had become a municipality measured in hundreds of square miles. That does not mean every inch became dense city. It did not. That is exactly the point. Oklahoma City did not grow like New York, where density piled upward because water and geography limited expansion. It did not grow like San Francisco, where a peninsula and hills forced the city into a tight shape. It did not grow like Chicago, where a dense urban grid expanded around an industrial lakefront. Oklahoma City grew like a frontier claim. The map got there before the buildings did. This gave the city extraordinary opportunities. It had room for industrial development. It had room for airports. It had room for highways. It had room for new neighborhoods, public facilities, water systems, business parks, and future projects that other cities would have to fight for block by block. But it also created a problem that every huge, low-density city eventually faces. Distance is expensive. A long road needs to be repaired. A faraway neighborhood needs police, fire protection, water, drainage, streetlights, and public services. A city can annex land quickly on a map, but turning that land into a connected urban system takes decades. The larger the boundary becomes, the harder it is for every resident to feel close to the same city. That is why Oklahoma City can feel so different depending on where you stand. In one part of the city, you see a traditional downtown revival. In another, you see a working cattle district. In another, you see the legacy of oil. In another, you see wide highways and development built for the automobile. In another, you see open land that feels closer to the Great Plains than to a major metropolitan area. They are all Oklahoma City. That changes the way people experience daily life. In a compact city, the central question is usually how to fit more people into less space. In Oklahoma City, the question is often how to connect people who already have plenty of space between them. A grocery store, a school, a job center, a park, a doctor, or a cultural institution can be part of the same municipality and still feel like a long journey away. This is not just a transportation problem. It is a civic problem. The larger the distance between neighborhoods, the harder it is for people to imagine that they share the same priorities. One part of the city may want faster roads. Another may need sidewalks. One may see new development as an opportunity. Another may see the cost of services spreading farther than the tax base can comfortably follow. Oklahoma City has always had to govern a place where the legal map is much more connected than the lived map. The same mayor and city council serve dense blocks near downtown, quiet residential streets, industrial corridors, airport land, and open territory that still carries the memory of the prairie. And that is why the city feels less like one continuous place and more like several American stories sharing the same government. It is a land-run town. It is a state capital. It is an oil city. It is a cattle city. It is an aviation center. It is a highway city. It is a sports city. It is a city that can have a downtown arena and wide open land inside the same municipal boundary. Most American cities were shaped by a natural advantage: a harbor, a river, a mountain pass, a lake, a coast. Oklahoma City was shaped by a political advantage. It could keep claiming land. And then, in the second half of the 20th century, the city discovered that having land was not enough. A city can be huge on a map and still struggle to create a center that people care about. For a long time, Oklahoma City had the classic problem of the automobile age. People could drive farther, development could spread outward, new shopping centers and suburbs could pull energy away from the old downtown. A city built around room to expand could end up expanding away from itself. That is where Oklahoma City became surprising again. Instead of accepting that downtown would remain an afterthought, residents decided to invest in it together. In 1993, voters approved a temporary 1-cent sales tax for a program called Metropolitan Area Projects. The basic idea was unusual. Instead of borrowing first and hoping future growth would pay the bill, Oklahoma City would collect the sales tax and use it to fund major public improvements. The projects helped reshape the city's public spaces, facilities, and downtown identity. This was not the same kind of expansion that had defined the city before. It was not another claim on the prairie. It was a decision to build a shared urban center inside the enormous boundary the city had already created. That distinction is important. Oklahoma City had spent much of its history solving problems by getting bigger. Now it was trying to solve a different problem by getting better. The city wanted parks, public spaces, cultural facilities, transit improvements, sidewalks, trails, and places that could make a spread-out city feel more connected. That is a very different kind of urban ambition from the ambition that created the city in the first place. The original land run rewarded the person who reached a piece of territory first. Modern civic investment asks residents to contribute to projects that belong to everyone. One is a race for private claims. The other is an argument for shared space. The latest generation of metropolitan area projects continues that approach. It uses a temporary sales tax to fund projects involving parks, transit, sidewalks, bike lanes, streetlights, youth centers, health services, innovation, beautification, and other public improvements. That is the modern Oklahoma City paradox. The city was founded in a rush for private land. It expanded through railroads, cattle, oil, highways, and annexation. It became enormous by treating territory as a resource. But its future increasingly depends on the opposite instinct. It depends on building shared places. It depends on making distance less powerful. It depends on giving people a reason to feel that all these different landscapes belong to the same city. That is not easy. A downtown can be rebuilt. A park can be improved. A transit line can be extended. But no project can erase the fact that Oklahoma City is vast. The city has to live with the geography it created, and yet that geography is also its advantage. Because Oklahoma City still has something that many successful American cities are running out of: options. It has room to build, room to adapt, room to attract new industries, room to create new neighborhoods, room to rethink old industrial land, room to invest in public projects without fighting over every single vacant block. The same vastness that makes Oklahoma City difficult to manage also gives it a kind of freedom. That freedom does not guarantee success. Empty land can become opportunity, but it can also become distance. A new highway can connect a city, but it can also pull activity farther from the center. A huge boundary can give a city room to grow, but it can also make every decision about infrastructure more expensive and more complicated. Oklahoma City makes sense only when you understand that it has always accepted that trade. It has repeatedly chosen reach over compactness, possibility over certainty, and a larger future map over a smaller present city. That freedom has always been the city's identity. In 1889, thousands of people ran into open land because they believed a new life could be claimed there. They did not find a finished city. They found a blank map. They had to decide where streets would go. They had to decide who would govern. They had to decide whether a temporary settlement could become a permanent place. More than a century later, Oklahoma City is still answering the same question. What do you do when you have more land than city? Oklahoma City's answer has always been simple. You build. You build railroads into connections. You build stockyards into industry. You build oil fields into wealth. You build a capital into permanence. You build highways into reach. You build a downtown into a destination. You build public projects into civic confidence. And whenever the city seems too small for its ambition, you expand the map. That is why Oklahoma City makes no sense as a United States city. It began as a town that appeared almost overnight on 400 acres of newly opened land. It had no harbor, no coastline, no great natural barrier forcing people together, no ancient urban core that had been building for centuries. Instead, it had prairie, rail tracks, cattle, oil, political ambition, and an almost limitless belief that the next piece of land could become part of the city. That belief turned a frontier camp into a state capital. It turned an oil boom into a permanent economy. It turned a map with disputed lines into a city with more than 600 square miles. And it created one of the strangest urban places in America. A city where the downtown is real, but not the whole story. A city where the horizon looks rural, but the government is metropolitan. A city where an oil field can sit beneath the capital. A city where the boundary grew so large that the urban core had to spend decades trying to catch up. Oklahoma City is not simply sprawling. It is a land-run city that never stopped running.